There's somebody else coming. He'll be here in a minute.
Okay. All right, good evening. At this time, I'll call the regular Board of Adjustments and Appeals meeting for November, still got October on this, November 28th, 2017. At this time, would you please join me call to order. If we call and turn and pledge allegiance to the flag, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May we have roll call, please?
Chairman Taylor,
Here?
Vice Chairman Shahayam.
Yes.
Member Hunley.
Yes.
Member Johnson.
Yeah.
Alternate Member Smith Rodriguez.
Here.
Very good. We have a full quorum tonight of 5. Looking at the minutes that were our last meeting, which August 23rd, 2017, were there any corrections or adjustments being made by anybody that saw to the minutes?
Not that I could see.
Seeing none, all those that approve, would you please say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the minutes have passed. Okay, I guess I have to read this little speech, don't I? All right, all persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card and be heard on that agenda item and sign the oath contained thereon. The cards are located on the table at the rear of the Chamber Council or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the procedures adopted in Resolution Number 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first. Those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have any photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the Commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and be retained by the City. Please submit such evidence or exhibits to the recording secretary. So you have filled out your card, correct, sir? Good. Next, confirm to the staff that the item has been properly advertised.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Are there any members that have visited the site or spoken to any member of the public regarding the reviewing of this item this evening?
No.
No. All right. Seeing none there. We have no consent. We have no old. And so we'll move on to new business, which is variance number 8-2017 for Willow Creek Phase 1. So staff, would you enlighten us, please?
Thank you, sir. The request is a variance to the following section of the land development regulations. That would be section 30-332, required landscape yards. The applicant is requesting to allow a 0-foot landscape yard in lieu of the required 20-foot landscape yard along the south property line. The zoning on the property is single-family R1C and open space and recreation OR. Property is located west of Grissom Parkway at the south end of the city. Currently, the property is vacant. Powers of the BAA are as follows. Section 47-144 states that the board shall grant a variance request when, in the opinion of the Board of Adjustments and Appeals, owing to special conditions, the literal enforcement of such ordinance or regulations would do manifest injustice to or impose an unnecessary hardship upon the applicant. In order to authorize any variance to the provisions of such ordinance, the board must consider the following criteria. A, special conditions and circumstances exist which are peculiar to the land, structure, or building involved and which are not applicable to other land, structures, or buildings in the same zoning. B, Special conditions and circumstances do not result from the actions of the applicant. C, granting the variance request will not confer upon the applicant any special privilege that is denied by the ordinance to other lands, buildings, or structures in the same zoning district. D, the literal interpretation of the provisions of the ordinance would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same zoning district under the terms of the ordinance. E, the variance granted is the minimum variance that will make possible the reasonable use of the land, building, or structure. F, the granting of the variance will preserve the spirit of the ordinance and remain in harmony with its general purpose and intent. G, in granting the variance, the public safety and welfare must be assured. H, in no case shall the granting of a variance result in a change of use which would not be permitted in that zoning. The 36-acre property was initially part of the 675-acre Willow Creek Development Agreement approved in 2004. In 2016, the 36 acres were rezoned to R1C zoning district and maintain the existing OR zoning, which is indicated on the attached zoning map. The applicant is proposing to construct a 71-lot single-family subdivision with minimum 65-foot lot frontages and 7,800 square foot lots. The minimum lot size in the R1C is 6,500 square feet. In 2016, the remaining Willow Creek project was rezoned to a planned unit development zoning district to allow for 1,277 residential units and 172 acres of commercial and light industrial use. It is the staff's understanding that the property subject to this request in Zone R1C is the first phase of the overall adjacent Willow Creek PUD. Both projects will use the same single access point, which is Willow Creek Boulevard. The land development regulations require a 20-foot landscape yard around the perimeter of the R1C property, and that's also required of any single-family subdivision. The applicant has requested a variance to allow no landscape yard at the south property line of the subject property. The applicant would like the existing vegetation on an undeveloped property to the south, not owned by the applicant, to meet this LDR requirement. The property to the south of the subject property is privately owned by the Flagler Development Company. The Flagler property is approximately 350 feet in width and is bisected by a cleared pathway approximately 170 feet in width containing high-tension power lines. During the staff review of the variance application, it appears that the utility easement is approximately 50 feet south of the Willow Creek property and not directly adjacent to the subject property, as indicated by the applicant. At any time in the future, the vegetated area within the adjacent property could be developed or cleared, potentially leaving no vegetated buffer behind the proposed single-family homes. The applicant has no control over the use of the adjacent property, not owned by them. The land development regulations require all properties to provide improvements on site, including landscaping, and do not allow other properties to be used to meet the minimum requirements of the LDR. The applicant described the need for the variance in order to protect native habitat and wetlands on the subject property. The applicant has not submitted information about the native habitat and wetlands. Staff recommends denial of the variance request. The applicant has not adequately provided information to justify a hardship on the subject property. The variance is not the minimum necessary to allow reasonable use of the property, and there are no special conditions or circumstances on the 35-acre property that would prevent meeting the R1C zoning district standards for a 71-lot single-family subdivision. The subdivision can be realigned to protect stated native habitat and wetlands and still meet the landscape yard requirement. The code does not allow the applicant to utilize a neighboring property for purposes of meeting the landscape yard requirement. The city cannot impose a condition on a neighboring property. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
No one? Good. Shirley.
Just, Mandy, was there any plans submitted with this to the city?
We've had a pre-application meeting.
Just pre-application meeting?
Yes,
Was
sir.
there any plans like at the pre-application meeting that submitted with, for like wetland delineation and,
Not to our site plan review committee.
okay?
And that's not a requirement at the time of a pre-app, but
But so they had a pre-app with you, that's mainly, okay.
You made a statement that the 50 feet, although it's owned by somebody else, could be developed for something else. Who can develop something on 50 feet?
Well, the property south is actually 350 feet in width, the one
Yes.
that's owned by Flagler. The reason we pointed out the 50 feet was in the application, the applicant indicated that the easement was abutting the Willow Creek property, but looking further, that easement is actually 50 feet south. So it's not right up against the Willow Creek property, kind of protected. There's actually, the Willow Creek property starts, and then there's property, go down south 50 feet, and then that's when the utility easement starts, which is where those power lines are. The power lines are actually, in the middle, if you look at an aerial, of that 350 feet in width, not right up against the Willow Creek property.
Well, is that the same owner of the Powerland properties?
Flagler owns that whole 350 feet
Okay,
in
they
width,
own the
which
whole-
includes that utility easement, yes.
Which includes,
I have an aerial pulled up on my iPad if you'd like to take a glance.
I think we had a picture. of
We
something,
might, I
didn't we?
thought we had put one in here, but
We had a color picture or something over here. Yeah, there it is.
Native, the landscape buffer, native plants and material that are currently there can suffice, is that correct?
correct. We actually encourage,
That's what I would have thought.
The whole
Yep.
thing is a
Just wanted to double
utility
check.
easement, and this is where the actual line is. So they're talking about 50
Let me ask you
feet
this, is
right
the
there.
landscape buffer, is it usually maintained by the homeowners association, that 20 feet? Or-
usually, yeah,
Usually it is.
That's what they're.
But could it be included as part of the lot?
it can be,
So, but it would be an easement as part of the plat then?
exactly,
all the
So you can have that as part of the easement,
correct.
as an easement inside the plat?
Correct.
Within the lot
Correct.
itself?
Yep.
Okay. So you don't have to dedicate like 20 feet additional to the lot itself?
I don't
Yeah,
believe
so
so,
they're
because
saying there should
we've
be
had
20
several
feet.
recently
build
that they're
on
part
this?
of the
Is that
lot.
what
No,
Okay.
They just
they're
don't want a
saying,
landscape.
they're saying LDR said there should be a buffer. This and that piece of property, 20 feet. That just,
Okay.
That's
I
so-
know. Fine.
are there any other questions of staff before we open up to the public? You're off easy. All right, in this case, we'll open up to the public at this time. May we have the first card, please?
Rodney Honeycutt.
Thank you. Mr. Honeycutt, please come up and address us with your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Rodney Honeycutt, 3700 South Washington Avenue in Titusville. And the first thing I want to do is give you a couple of sketches. Thank you. Yes, that'll be the first one I'll talk about. So does everybody have a copy of it? So Willow Creek is a 675-acre development with 35% open space. And so the first sketch I wanted you to look at shows the open space and the wetlands. That was the plan that was used for the rezoning for this property. And so that is public record. It's not anything new, but that's the area. The other thing, and I'll mention later, the access from Grissom Boulevard is fixed because the frontage on Grissom Boulevard is a commercial property, and the access road, Willow Creek Boulevard, actually is already constructed to a wetland on the east side of the wetland. As part of the first phase of this project, will continue that access road to this site. So the open space on this project, which is the wetlands and native habitat, is the project amenity for the PUD. This is a beautiful piece of property to develop. The wetlands are going to make a great amenity because they will not be disturbed. Phase one of this property is on the southeast corner, 36 acres. It's shown on that map. The southern border of phase one, as staff has reported, backs up to a wooded area approximately 100 feet wide. So if you look at that map that's colored on the bottom, the green strip that runs along there is the 100-foot wide, approximately wooded area south of and adjacent to this site. Just south of that, there's an area that's not colored. That's area that's owned by Flagler Development, but is encumbered by a perpetual easement from Florida Power and Light. The red area is property that Florida Power and Light owns. So for some reason, when they the area that's not colored and the red area, the power line runs right through the middle of it. You can actually see we located poles and everything. It's a very large line, and so this is the east-west line that comes from the big plant. One of those lines. This is the main line, and so what I wanted to do was show you that although Flagler owns, as staff said, maybe up to 350 feet wide, that area in white is the Flagler property that's encumbered by a perpetual Florida Power and Light easement, that it's not just one line, it's double lines, and there's a road that goes through the middle of it. I mean, it's a huge power line, so it's not like somebody's going to be developing on that. When Flagler owns a lot of property around the airport, or did. In about 2002, they sold about 1,200 acres of this property. A part of it became Willow Creek, as we're looking at. Why they left that strip on the bottom, I'm not quite sure. When we had originally talked to them about it, they said there was an easement across that whole strip. When we got the easement and actually looked at it, we see that there is a portion that the FPL does not have an easement on. The entire property they sold was about 1,200 acres. The purchaser sold some of the north portion back, sold it to the airport, and the east portion on both sides of Grissom Parkway they developed into a commercial. So it left about 675 acres for the residential tract that you see on that first map I passed out to you. So staff has estimated that the unencumbered strip to be about 50 feet wide between the easement. We think it's a little wider than that. The phase one parcel is zoned. The parcel that Flagler owns is zoned R1B. And so the only area in that Flagler property that's not encumbered is not wide enough to develop it. And so it can't be developed. And so we're requesting that wooded area on the south side of Willow Creek be accepted as a buffer area to development of phase one. The closest development to this south side of this property is 600 feet away at Cypress Creek. And all of that property is either owned, except this strip that Flagler has, is owned by Florida Power and Light or Orlando Utilities Commission. And Orlando Utilities Commission also has a power line south of Florida Power and Light running east-west, a major line for them. And so by utilizing the 100 strip for our buffer, Willow Creek Phase 1 will be able to minimize wetland and natural habitat impact. Now, the reason I mentioned that access road a while ago, the road comes across the wetland. The wetland is part of the commercial project, and it's in a tract, Gesundheit. It's in a tract that is a conservation easement and can't be developed, except for that little rectangular box, and that rectangular box is part of that plat, and that's owned by the developer and owner of this large residential area. And so that's set. And if you look at it on that first plan, it comes in and loops around a big wetland. And so there's not much room at all to move that up. And so development of phase 1 of this project is very difficult because of the limitations to the north and south. So we need every square inch. And that's why we're asking on the south side, on phase 1, for the buffer to be allowed for the outside of the existing tract that can't be developed. And it's already 100-foot wide of wooded area. So
How much of the property did they give up to maintain those wetlands and leave them in a natural state? About how much of the entire property?
the first map that I gave you shows all the existing wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, and there's about 225 acres.
Okay.
We have a concept plan for the whole and an estimated impact of wetlands, and I can't remember exactly, but I think it's like 20 acres, like 10% is all we're
Wow.
impacting to do all that. Because the whole amenity for this subdivision is that wetlands and native impact. And so west of Phase 1, we also have development that is adjacent to this same tract. But we're not asking for this variance for that portion. Because if you look at that portion, it's not impacted by the wetlands above it, just and tied into that road, we have room to move it. So it's not as critical. It's only this area right here. I think staff's main comments opposed to this was that that wooded area could be developed and cleared, and we don't think that's possible. We don't think that staff would issue a permit for that. I don't know how they could. Also, they mentioned that a wetland or habitat study was not submitted with this. There's been lots of information submitted on this project. There was a previous approved development plan, and we've gone through the initial phase, the pre-application meeting, and we felt like there was enough information to realize this. Plus, the commercial area went through full development when it was developed. Just as a side, that wetland between the commercial area and this residential area, that slough that runs up there that we're preserving, is beautiful. I mean, there are oak trees in the middle of the wetland that probably 3 people would have to reach around. That's all being preserved. So you can understand why it's important to preserve that and make that amenity to this project.
So it's the oaks that'll grow in the wetlands and not the pines?
These wetlands, water does not stand in this wetland. It's just a low plateau. You have three criteria. It can be the soils, the vegetation, and the water. And in this case, the water is not it. It's vegetation and the soils that make it a wetland.
Okay.
So anyway, does anybody have any questions?
Yes. Aside from it being convenient that there's 100 feet of trees on the other side of this line, why can't you shorten the 20 feet? I assume there's already vegetation from the line 20 feet north, right?
The entire site's wooded.
Okay. So aside that it's convenient for it already to be there, why can't you just shorten, instead of 20 feet, isn't there something between 0 and 20 that would be useful? Rather than just zeroing it out because it's convenient on the other side of the line?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. The building, the lots that we have now, it wouldn't work to put an easement, which you could do instead of having a tract. it wouldn't work to take the whole 20 feet out of it because we need it. But if there was 5 feet, I'm sure that would work. The reason we need that space is the areas would be built up, because you can imagine if there's wetlands in there, it's generally low. And so we'll need room behind the homes, and then some of the homes will want pools, and that would mean that none of these could have pools if we put the easement on that property. There would only be 5 feet back of the building line.
So if I'm looking at the black and white map that you handed out, right below where it says subdivision C, that's the line that we're talking about?
Subdivision C is not part of this request. It's not south of that. It's only Phase 1, which is east of subdivision C.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
got you.
subdivision C, we've agreed we
Okay.
will not, because we have lots of room there. It's not like it's compacted like Phase 1 is. Phase 1 is just a very difficult site.
So what's the percentage of wetlands on, I guess, the south side of the property
Okay.
that you'd have to fill in or fill up
Oh, they
for
have a bunch of
vegetation?
Well, on the south side of the property, we're not going to fill any wetlands.
Okay.
But if you mean how much land that I mentioned a minute ago, I mean, I can imagine that we're going to be at least 2 or 3 feet above the natural ground out there now. And so we just have to have room to bring that slope back down.
So how tall would the wooded area be, and how tall would a landscape? If you landscaped it, isn't that shorter than what the woods would be?
Certainly initially, yes. Maybe years later it would grow up. Yeah, that's the idea. But initially it would be, yeah.
So the woods offer more privacy to either side? I mean, isn't that the issue?
Yes.
Is that you don't want to
Yes,
see?
the city would always like you to preserve the natural wooded, yeah, in either case.
Okay, so let me get this straight. There's already, ignore the FPL and the easement and all the trees on the other side of the line. There's already vegetation where you're saying, where you basically want to clear it? You said it's a whole wooded lot, right?
Yes,
Okay, so you want to go up to the line, so you want to clear a lot of that current wooded area and then just use the existing trees on the other side of the line.
let that be the buffer, since there's no development to the south. The whole
Okay.
purpose of the buffer,
Oh, I got that part.
Yeah, okay.
I understand that part. Just looking at what the code allows. So rather than clearing that 20 feet, you could clear a little less than 20 feet to use the minimum variance requested to still meet your goal, right? So you're not planting anything, you're just removing less.
if the variance is approved, or even if you said a 15-foot variance, which left 5 feet, then any part in that, the trees would remain, yes. I think you
Okay.
understand what I'm saying.
All right.
Any other questions of this witness?
Okay, I just want to get this straight. Property line's here. The easement's here. Oh, I should be looking at this. I don't understand why you just can't use the wooded as the buffer. I mean, why would you have to landscape it? You already have trees there. They're taller. They would put a better buffer there than landscaping. And why disturb natural and clear any of it when you don't have to, if we want to preserve as much natural? You're not saying that?
What we're saying is that we want to be able to clear the woods on the Willow Creek property
Yeah.
and use the wooded area south of Willow Creek property as the buffer,
Yeah.
as the wooded buffer.
That makes sense. That's working with nature. Okay, so you want to leave the wooded acreage that's not yours, that butts up to easement for Florida Power and Light, and just use that
As our buffer.
as your buffer.
That's what we're requesting.
Okay. That makes
I think
makes sense.
maybe I'm confused now. I thought what I heard you say earlier was that if you were granted this variance, you were going to clear land all the way to that perimeter.
To the property line.
Right.
To the property line.
But if the buffer remains intact and you don't get a variance, that will have to stay a natural buffer.
No, that he'll have
That's-
to clear it and put a landscape
No,
on it.
no, we won't. No.
Oh, no, okay.
Maybe Rodney, do you want me to? Sure.
If you want to. yeah.
Okay. So the request is for them to clear what is a required 20-foot buffer on their site completely, all down to the property line. They want to use the property south of theirs, not owned by them, their buffer as that requirement. And that's why staff is saying, the code doesn't allow you to use someone else's property to meet the code requirement. You, as a developer, are responsible for meeting the LDR requirements on your own property. Does that clarify?
And if I could just elaborate on one section of the code. In section 30-332, the required landscape yards, there is a code section that talks about whether the property is adjacent to vacant land. That's the situation here. And just to make sure that the board understands, the code says if adjacent property is vacant, the current zoning designation shall be used to determine the minimum landscaping requirements along that property line. And the applicant's requesting a variance to that section.
Which is a good point, because the real issue is that property south is zoned residential. And it was zoned residential because Flagler annexed about 2,000 acres all at one time. This 1,200 acres I was talking about being part of it. And so that little strip, they didn't sell it as part of Willow Creek development. So it just left it there that you can't do anything with.
So it's not developable. You couldn't build a residence on it if you wanted to.
I would ask staff that question.
Yeah. My rebuttal is it is zoned R1B, but we have people apply for rezonings all the time. So, we have to look at it from a, perspective of this, it could potentially be developed. It doesn't, we can't look at it like, okay, it's zoned residential 2-day right now. They could come in and request a rezoning.
Can you put a road through 50 foot wide? Can you put a road in there?
You could put a road in for development. I guess I'm not really understanding.
I thought it was only 50 foot wide, the whole wooded area.
No, it's the staff report
100
says
feet
it's the utility easement is 50 feet south of the Willow Creek property. That property is 300 and something foot wide, and then, like Rodney said, approximately 100 feet wide.
Okay, so that's about 100 foot wide.
So, they could come in and rezone it and put a rail spur. I don't know. So,
A rail spur?
Maybe the next property.
gas lines.
to buy.
I don't know.
Right.
Right.
But residential, very low possibility.
Who knows? I wish I could read into the future too. But
Well,
we have to.
It would be hard
We have to.
do.
Well, I think
we
the
look at
simple-
it from a perspective of protecting the property owners that could potentially move into that subdivision.
I think the simple point is that it's someone else's property, and you're not really sure what they're going to like to do with it.
And in 99.9% of the cases, I agree with you. But this is a case that it's not like that, and that's why we're asking for this. We think it's unique.
May I?
Certainly, sir.
Rodney, I took the liberty of looking at this subdivision, the way it's set up right now. It looks like it's about 120 feet deep, those slots. There's about 20 lots that are affected with this, right?
Maybe less, something like that.
About
yes.
19 or 20. And the lots to the north of it, they are about 120 too. And the minimum lot size was 6,500, I think. And if there is some adjustment to the east-west road, just shifting the road a little bit further to the north, it would affect that tract I can't see it, tract F. And what is tract F? Tract F is a stormwater.
I don't have that. Is it in the?
Yeah, it's in the submittal. It's
Staff
part of the
report?
subdivision. Yeah.
Ronnie, it's labeled stormwater management.
Stormwater then? Okay.
It says stormwater management. Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of them, tract F and tract M.
Yeah, track F is stormwater,
Okay. So,
track E is stormwater.
yeah, if that roadway, the east-west roadway, it could shift like maybe at least 10 feet, maybe 15 feet to the north, that the buffer is there. And the same thing with the other one, and you won't lose probably no lots. And you will still, shift the whole thing up and keep the 120 feet. And it might work. I mean, that way
Well,
you don't need.
We've tried to make it work. That's why, I mean, we spent lots of time trying to make this work, and it's difficult
Yeah.
to do that. We need all the stormwater area we have. It's, the entrance road is hard to shift any, and the 120-foot lots is the minimum that the developer wants in depth.
Yeah, the only thing I'm talking about is when you shift that, it's not going to affect except maybe one or two lots. And it doesn't look like, I mean, the lots are 120, they need to be 100. Not that they need to be 100, but for construction of the model homes, it might not fit. But it looks like it's workable between those two.
We wouldn't be here if we felt it was workable without losing a lot.
Well,
several
the
lots.
staff didn't get any information to, that's what we've been hearing from the staff, is they didn't have the support for this, and they don't have enough information to actually recommend approval.
Mr. Honeycutt, your variance request, it says regarding the minimum necessary. The entire 20-foot landscape yard needs to be included in the 100-foot wide buffer to eliminate additional impact to the Willow Creek native habitat and wetland amenity. But you're going to destroy the natural habitat of 20 feet, all the wooded area, so you're not preserving anything. You're causing an impact to it.
We're not going to do anything to the wetland native habitat area that I talked about there.
Okay, so this is
There, if you look at that, if you look
native
at this,
habitat and wetland amenity.
if you look at this map, there are areas, there are no lots that back up to the property line. That's because that's the areas that's being preserved.
Okay. So what I really want to know is what's the actual minimum on your side, your actual property, not the 100 yards, 100 feet on the other side of the line. What is the actual minimum that you need to remove that's not this?
Is your question, could we ask for less than a 20-foot variance?
Yes, because this is not the minimum that's actually required for what your project is. So I want to know what the actual minimum is.
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, if there was we could do a 15-foot variance and leave 5 feet. And you can't do anything in the 5 feet anyway. So,
All right. So 5 foot is that's what you need. So 15-foot variance is your minimum request. Okay.
Are there any other questions, Mr. Honeycutt? Thank you,
Well,
sir. Oh, go ahead.
I have to confess, I'm still a little bit puzzled when you say that you're going to, by doing this, you're going to save something in a wetlands area. I haven't seen any evidence of what that something would be, and I don't know that you can. I mean, the wetlands is the wetlands, so I would think you would need additional permits if you were going to do something different.
So what I mean is if you shift all of these lots north 20 feet, then we have it now where we're impacting minimal wetlands, and every area is either road, a lot, or stormwater. And so if you take that 20 feet out, then it just dominoes all the way up. And there's going to be wetlands impact. Probably the first thing to do would be to shift that road. If you notice, the access road comes in and then dips. It's to keep from impacting more of that wetland. And so we may have to shift it up.
Rodney, the only thing I'm looking at is there's lots on the north side of the roadway going east and west. There is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lots. And if you shift those, there's a combination of two things you can do. You can reduce the sizes of these lots, basically from 120, let's say, to 115 or 110, and then, both sides, and then shift the road up, and you don't have to have the variance.
Yeah, that's what it appears.
And you're not impacting the wetland. You're not impacting any wetland in this area.
That's if you reduce the size of the lots.
If you reduce the size of the lot, like not reducing the actual minimum required, but you're reducing the size that you are putting in at this location.
So the developer wants a minimum of a 40 by 70 pad.
House, yeah.
And that's what creates this.
Yeah. But you might be able to shift the whole thing up 20 feet without affecting the entrance road and just affecting some lots, basically, and reducing maybe one lot eliminating one lot from the combination here. I don't know. The main thing is this is not the property that's owned by the same developer, and that's they can use this property for anything. Like they can combine it with the let's say they make a deal between them and the power line easement and power line people, and they take this and then clear the whole thing. They can put another line there. They can buy it. Somebody comes in and gives them money for it.
Yeah, I can say personally I'm not comfortable with encumbering someone else's property for something like, particularly that has the zoning.
If it was a public land, I can see it, but if it's not a public land.
Well, in this case, I think it's unique. I don't see that happening because they just own a narrow strip of property and the power lines are set. They're not like their small power lines, and they may double them later. They're huge power lines. You can see on this drawing, there's 2 poles in at each one. And so I don't see that happening. I think this is a unique case where it is acceptable to do this. I agree with you in general, what you're saying, but I think this is unique.
What's the setback for the power lines? How far do you have, how close can they build to those power lines?
The city doesn't regulate utility lines like that.
You don't say that you can't build up next to those utility lines?
Not that I know of. Chelsea, you might know a little bit more.
Generally, the utility company is going to have an easement, and you can't do anything in that easement area, and that's what protects that.
Okay, so basically you can build up to that line.
To that easement, yes, the city would permit that.
Is there a landscape buffer for anybody that builds up to that easement?
Not for utility companies.
Not for
you mean the other person?
Yeah, if somebody developed that, do they have to put a landscape up against the easement?
We're talking in hypotheticals at this point. Right now, we're talking about a code section that talks about vacant adjacent land.
Just vacant adjacent land,
And
nothing to do with...
that was my point
vacant
earlier, is that
land.
we're talking about a specific code section where you're dealing with vacant adjacent properties and what you do in that situation as far as landscape buffers are concerned.
Well, I'm going down further down the line, that if somebody wanted to develop that, if y'all make the decision on that property, so say somebody wanted to go in and build that property, do they have to do a landscape buffer up against, or how far do they have to set back from the easement? Can they build right up to the easement?
Each property has buffering requirements, just like Willow Creek has to buffer themselves to the neighboring property. Now, that, they could request a variance not to put in a buffer, so, you do have buffering requirements.
So what's the minimum that would be for a buffer?
It depends on the use of the property. So it could be anywhere, it could be 20 feet, it could be
20 foot?
10, it
10,
could be
is that the minimum?
20 and an opaque buffer. So yeah, like Chelsea said, it depends on the use.
So the smallest buffer that they could do is 10 foot?
Depends on if it's the same use, then sometimes it's 10. If it's not, sometimes it's 20 with an opaque fence or wall. So
So
No,
it's
it
never
depends-
required five.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
This
Okay.
particular section starts with 332A reads, required landscape yard type establishes when a landscape yard is required for differing land use intensities. Only the proposed development or redevelopment shall be required to provide the buffer. The applicant shall install the type of landscape yard indicated in the required landscape yard type table. After that, it talks about subsection 1. If an adjacent property is vacant, the current zoning designation shall be used to determine the minimum along that property line. So there is a set formula. There's a chart where we are set to follow what is required, but in the event where it's the vacant land, we have to deal with hypotheticals. And in that event, we are guided by the code, which says 20 feet in this scenario.
Okay.
So this is, my thought is like a combination between an easement and a variance. But what's happening is, we have to remember, this is a low site and it has to be built up. So there is some grading that takes place, and if you do 4-to-1 slope and you're going 4 feet, that's another 12 feet that has to be taken away from the lot. So there should be a combination somehow, worked out. But to me, the 20 feet is not the minimum required. There should be a combination between the lot configuration, the actual cross sections, how we're going to get to a point of where we can actually justify the hardship, that this is causing on the lots, Right now, I don't see it, and I don't know what the combination is.
I have a question that I don't know how appropriate it is. Did the developer attempt to purchase the 20 feet on the other side of the line to fix this problem?
I can't answer that, but I think the next speaker might can.
Oh, okay.
So we need to just come up with a formula that would balance out is that what we're looking for? Okay, we'll go ahead and hear.
Yeah, if we can, everybody satisfied with Mr. Honeycutt at the moment? Okay. Thank you, sir. And call up our next speaker, please.
Chuck Piper.
Yes, Chuck. If you would please give your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Chuck Piper, 804 West 2nd Avenue in Windermere, Florida. I'm a representative of the owner of the 675-acre property. It's a KB Home. There's a lot of history on this property. I'm going to try not to be repetitive, what Mr. Honeycutt said tonight, and I apologize if I am somewhat repetitive. But as he said earlier, this 675 acres was a much larger piece of property that Flagler owned at one time. I think he said maybe about 2,000 acres. The strip of land that is located on the south side of our southern boundary, just as accurate as Mr. Honeycutt said, it ranges anywhere from 300 to 320 feet deep from the southern side of our property. And then there obviously it goes east and west, all the way out to Grissom Parkway and then out to 95. One of you asked, have we tried to purchase this property? We made sure that this strip of land was not included in the 675-acre parcel that was purchased over a decade ago. And the reason is there's that Florida Power easement, and we knew that we were going to have residential homes. Actually, at the time, we were going to have townhomes on this property, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we wanted to have this so-called buffer because you don't want to have homes backing up to transmission line, especially one of this size that requires 170 feet. And the reason why it requires 170 feet, those are big transformer towers that are out there, and they need that room for swing, for wind. To the point someone mentioned earlier about another easement perhaps going north of the 170-foot easement, which would be in this 50 to 100 feet that separates to our property. I've done a lot of work with a lot of the different power companies, and I can't think of a line that could fit in a 50 to 100-foot area that would protect them from the swing going into potential residential and also into their existing transformer lines. That's the 170 feet. But that was one of the reasons why this strip of land has been created, and it's still owned by Flagler. Now, Flagler, it's a very difficult thing phone call to make today because there's been a lot of transition, just like there has been a lot of transition in KB Home. It's been over a decade now. But there's been various purchases of this property, and there's no direct contact on this strip of land because it's considered a buffer, although it's residential. The reason why it's residential was back over 15 years ago, actually, when this entire piece was annexed into the city. It came with these different land uses, one being residential and then open space and recreation, which is on both sides of our southern boundary line. And I know that the code has very important language, important to all residential developments, that when you are adjacent to another residential development, whoever comes in first has got to provide that buffer, and you want to have that buffer between properties, and I completely understand that. However, there's reasons why we have an opportunity to ask for a variance or a waiver. In this case, we have a situation where you have a residential property that's adjacent to a property that just happened to be residential that we did not purchase because we wanted to keep a nice buffer away from this transmission line to the south of us. And that piece of property that is now a wooded, treed area south of us, I would like to know how it could possibly develop, because if it's 50 feet at its greatest, or the staff said it was actually 50 feet, I think it actually goes up to 100 feet. I don't see how you can bring a road that you require a 50-foot right-of-way for standard roads, or even if someone did a private driveway of 20 feet, they'd have to take a 20-foot driveway. If you look at the maps here, all the way from Grissom Parkway, all the way to the back of one of our lots, to have really just one house because of a road, and you have only 50 to 100 feet. So this is a situation where you have a code that is not really applicable in this case because you have two properties, one that cannot be developed residential. And unless Florida Power decides that they want to tear down the transmission lines, huge transmission lines, to give power to a lot of other places that they've planned and that's been in place for a lot of years, you would still be limited to any type of residential in that area, especially because there's wetlands that are crossing that property. So I just wanted to just really emphasize, because I was listening, there's been a lot of good dialogue here, and I'm glad that there's a lot of intellectual knowledge here about the entitlement process and the engineering process. We've asked Honeycutt and Associates often, many times, to redesign this phase one of ours, so we only have to be up here and asking for a waiver. And they've tried that. Shortening these lots would make it complicated for not just us as a builder, but any national builder, because the market demands right now of what they're looking for the size of homes they have, the width is not so difficult, it's the depth of the homes that makes it difficult. And if we go shorter than a 70-foot building pad, after taking in your front setbacks and your rear setbacks, you're at a 120-foot lot. Anything short of that would require us to have to offer two-story homes, which some people may want, but it just means those homes are going to be more expensive to our future buyers. And we're trying to capture a lower price point in our first phase and start growing this community. So I mentioned earlier that this has a lot of history on it. And again, over 13 years ago, I think it was, KB Home had a development agreement on this property. And this property, the 675 acres, it was all 100% residential. 10 years later, the development agreement expired. We went through a terrible economic downturn during that time. And I was brought in as a representative of KB Home to come back to the city and say, look, you won't renew our development agreement that we have now. Why, and what can we do to move forward? And after about over a year of a very good dialogue with the city, and then also with Tyco, our neighboring airport, I understood quickly that one of the reasons why our property was not going to be renewed as a development agreement was, one, you didn't want to set precedents for a 10-year expiration date, but moreover, you didn't want to see 100% residential on our property. So I worked with the airport and the city of Titusville, and we've come up with the current plan today, which is now an approved comp plan and a PUD for the entire site that includes an area to the very northern end of our property where the airplanes and helicopters can fly over our property, not be flying over rooftops, but there will be some commercial and retail areas. It's a mixed-use property. So we've made some concessions. The city has made some concessions for us as well. The property that we're talking about tonight is our first phase, was planned for townhomes. Today, we went with the lowest density allowable at the time, which is the 65-foot lots. And we actually had asked for a rezone to that use. And now we're here asking that we don't have to, although we have wetland mitigation credits available to us that we've already purchased to mitigate wetlands, we'd like to preserve as much wetlands as possible and not impact wetlands to the north of us to accommodate this buffer if we're denied tonight. A buffer that, again, is adjacent to a property that may have residential zoning, but if there's a way that that property could be developed into residential, I'd certainly like to know it, because still we wouldn't want to buy it because it's going to be backed up to a transmission line. And that's the whole purpose of why that strip is sitting there like that today. So hopefully that helps just kind of talk about the history of the property, but moreover, how that strip really was created, the strip that's from our property all the way to the transmission line, even though it's all retained by Flagler. Does anyone have any questions for me or for Mr.
Yes.
Honeycutt?
Well, I want to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Honeycutt. So ignoring all that wooded area, what is the actual minimum that you can do?
He's the one who asked that question.
Okay, so I didn't know if you had a different opinion, so he said 5.
I don't know if it's, whatever the most is that we can provide, I'm happy to provide that. And so I would rather put that on him because he's the engineer.
And he's answered.
It's not 20. I know that. But I know that we could probably do something from 0 to 20. So whatever, I'm going to rely on him because I'm not the engineer.
But back to a discussion a little bit earlier, some combination between that minimum and a small movement of the roadway coming in, it seems like between the two of those, you might be able to get pretty close.
Again, that's Mr. Honeycutt's expertise. I've gone out with the pencils and marked them up and showed it to him. He says, "Okay, Chuck, but you're not accounting for the amount of stormwater that's required for this property. You're not accommodating the main boulevard would have to be adjusted by adjusting it to the north. There's a strip of wetlands right there. We can impact them more. We have the credits for it, but do you want to do that?" And what makes this property very valuable to us is, one, we think that Titusville is not a bedroom community to Orlando. It's a job hub, and there's a lot of jobs coming here. And there's not many builders that have done business in here for quite a long time. And we want to be one of the first builders that's going to bring this to the market. But this property's got a lot of nice wetlands associated with it, and we want to keep those as much as possible.
When we all very much appreciate that.
Yes.
Definitely.
Well, hopefully you'll accommodate our simple request here tonight.
One last thing, I believe Mr. Honeycutt mentioned that the wetlands, I think he mentioned 3 categories of wetlands: soil, vegetative, and water. And this was mainly soil or vegetative category. In other words, there's not standing water here.
The wetland that's between the commercial area and the residential area, the north-south slough, that's the one that water doesn't stand in. It's a big, wide wetland.
Okay.
Other wetlands on site are mixed, and some of them have water in it. There's even, if you look on your map, there's even a bar pit up in the northwest corner.
Okay. Because the one track obviously is bisecting the area you mentioned as a wetland, so.
Correct. That's the access
Right.
track. Yeah, that's the one I was describing. That's already set. That's in the plat. It's already mitigated for that crossing.
Yeah.
Is tract M is a retention pond too? Or
Right there.
Excuse me, Sid, I put my glass.
tract M, yeah.
Was that track M?
I left my glasses in
Oh,
the
wait a
office.
minute. Let me see. M is wetland.
Is wetland?
Yeah.
Okay. So just the tract F is the retention pond then?
F and,
I think a little bit of I
yeah, some of I, if that's what that's over there.
to the west,
To the west?
right there. And then there's a little wetland right there too.
Oh, tract I? So tract J is a wetland?
Yeah, that's that sliver.
Yeah, I think J is a wetland and K is upland. But there's no stormwater there. Track I is the stormwater.
Oh, tract I and tract F, then
Yeah,
the stormwater.
if you
yeah.
look at K, and then you look at the first map, you'll see that that's the corner of a big wetland that goes up, so we didn't want to
Okay.
impact it.
And J is an upland too, or no?
J, where's J? J is the wetland between tract I and tract K.
And a lot of those wetlands come all the way to the transmission line.
Oh, I see, but to tract J and tract K, they're both wetland, you're saying, right?
I'm not sure about, I think K is that right there. See that? Right there? That's all wetland right there. That's the corner right there.
Yeah.
You can see that where the boundary of
Yeah.
phase one is, it goes right into that wetland on the very west end side.
On the
So I
big
think-
map, yeah.
I
Okay.
think K is a portion of wetlands too.
Yes.
Just a quick question to staff. There is, if it doesn't make any difference who comes in first, like with the development, if you have a development like this, you need a 20-foot buffer.
Correct.
It doesn't
Depending
make
on
any
the
difference
zone.
who comes first.
Depending on the zoning that you abut.
Right.
Yes,
But it would be a 20-foot buffer from either parcels.
correct.
Okay.
But if it's,
It's a requirement.
right.
Okay. All right.
Do we have any other questions of these witnesses?
One thing that if we elect to table this, can you come up with a solution, like a happy medium somewhere that a minimum buffer could be given to this development?
If you're prepared.
Go 10, like,
I think the answer is yes. However, if you're prepared to provide that number tonight, we would not have to use their time for next time either. I don't want to put you on the spot. but
It's not that.
We've done
it's
a
not
lot
that
of
simple.
evaluation.
Trust me, it's not that
well,
simple.
I'm kind of thinking that the minimum buffer we're talking about is 10, that anybody gets on any level, and I would
No.
think that that's halfway in between.
You can't do that.
We can't,
No, because Mr. Honeycutt has to look at it, and it takes a lot of time to generate.
Yeah, that's part of the,
I'm going to assume that you're not going to do anything more than 10 feet. And so that would help us. Obviously, all 20 feet is what we really want. So none of our lots are affected. But Mr. Honeycutt said that 10 feet could probably work for us too. It's going to be tight. So if that's our option, if it's either a vote of no or you'll consider the 10 feet, then I don't like the no answer.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, there are no more cards to be
No,
heard?
sir.
All right, then we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Do we have any discussion or further questions of staff?
can you explain anything about the swing of power lines? If there's double power lines there and there's swing, I mean, and if they're going to need a 20-foot buffer, if somebody builds there,
Well, I can imagine, I mean, Mr. Piper seems to know more than I think I definitely know about power lines, so you could call him back. It seems to me that the power lines and the easement are shifted 50 feet south of the Willow Creek property line to give them some room to do those types of things to protect the north property line. I don't, if they didn't have those requirements and the easement right and power line might be right up to the Willow Creek property line, but, I don't know about swing lines and.
I mean, as far as discussion goes, I think it's certainly convenient, and the likelihood of somebody building, I don't know, and we're not in a position to say or judge. But at the end of the day, this is on their property, and they have requirements that they have to meet. So even if we do something negotiated between 0 and 20, and then we hope nobody builds or removes trees on the other side of the line, well, then good.
well, they'll have a 20-foot buffer. Or a 10-foot buffer, then we got a 20-foot buffer.
Sid, why don't you talk a little bit about your map there?
Well, No, we talked about combination of shifting, yeah. Basically, we talked about the combination of shifting the lots to the north, and they will affect basically Tract F, which is the stormwater management portion, and they'll affect too Tract M, but Tract M, it won't be affected that much. It's only a short piece, maybe. I'm not sure exactly where the wetland line is, but it might be taken into the wetland line never straight anyway, so there is a combination of shifting the lots to the north and shifting all the lots to the north about 20 feet, and that might eliminate one lot, maybe. I don't know. It takes lots of work in order to come up with something like this. But shifting
Chairman?
this up, we might take one lot out. And that way you don't need any variance. The main thing that we want to emphasize that we can't go into somebody else's property and say we're going to have a buffer there. No matter if they are using it or not. If it's a public property, and then I can see it. But if it's somebody else's property, no.
Taking what Mr. Honeycutt is describing with moving the lots further north and interfering with some wetland area, I can appreciate him not wanting to disturb as much as possible. And so I'm not opposed to doing something less than the 20, but certainly not 0, because it's not their property. So, I mean, as far as some special circumstances go, I can understand and appreciate the wetlands toward the north, perhaps 10 feet. And maybe that's generous, but I can appreciate the wetland component.
The thing is, we're not impacting the wetland to the north. You're just impacting a small sliver, about maybe 50 feet times 10. So it's about 1,000 square feet of wetland. And if you look at this, the Tract M is a square. It looks like a square, but actually the wetland is never a straight line. So there's some flexibility there, and I'm not sure what it is. So.
Well, we have a request, but someone would have to come forth and ask the applicant if he would change his request or make a motion or so forth. But I don't know. I guess we have to ask council if that can be done. We can't we can't just set it, us set it.
The question
arbitrarily.
is here before this board to determine what is the minimum necessary to grant this variance, and it is up for you guys to just make that determination.
Okay, we can't do that, all right.
May I ask a question of staff? Of course. I know that you described that a wetland study had not been provided to you all. If you all had this wetland study, does that address some of all this discussion that we're having here?
The city engineer could certainly review it, and along with Mr. Honeycutt, we do that often, sit down and determine, is there a minimum? What's the minimum requested variance? And we could suggest ways to, with the natural habitat in the wetlands, suggest ways, even the lot size, to lessen the impact of a landscape buffer. And I just wanted to point out that the applicant requested to rezone this property in 2016 from R2 to R1C. I'm assuming R1C because of the higher density, but the minimum lot size of R1C is 6,500 square feet, and the lot sizes in this are 7,800 square feet, which is 1,300 square feet more than the minimum. So adjustments, we could sit down and suggest adjustments. But whether, we could suggest, but, whether an applicant would like to move down that road is up to them.
So by way of discussion, I mean, if the wetland study had been provided and there would have been other discussions other than right here, then maybe the code can be completely complied with. So now I'm less inclined. Still appreciate wetlands, less inclined.
So we can't make a motion to ask for the 10-foot variance as opposed to the 5-foot variance that they wanted? And
At this time, the applicant has not verbally confirmed a modification to their request.
okay, that was between them. They didn't really turn around and talk. Okay.
All right, Mr. Hunt. Turn the mic on, please, sir.
Testing, yeah. So after discussing it, we would accept a 10-foot variance instead of a 20-foot variance.
All right, sir. Thank you. Okay, we've had their reply now.
Okay.
Is there any more discussion? And I will.
I would just like to mention that, to me, there's actually two aspects to this. One is not to encumber another piece of property with a buffer that is a requirement here, and the other one is actually just a variance request to the buffer itself. And so I just would like to make clear that what we would be considering is just a variance request that doesn't account for anything connected with this adjacent piece of property. It's just
That's true, yeah. That's
only that.
only this property is involved. That's correct. All right. Well, does anyone wish to make any kind of motion? I can't do it.
That doesn't sound.
Well, it doesn't sound positive, no. It's just...
Just have one other observation here. This is kind of a general thing. Since staff didn't have a benefit of any kind of a wetland study here, we really don't even know what we certainly don't know what we would be agreeing to or not agreeing to in terms of what impacts not granting this results in. I don't know. So it's almost as if we're being asked to make a decision without sufficient information. It feels to me like, anyway. And staff is not able to say that they have that information either. So I'm kind of nonplussed.
That's one of the suggestions I made earlier, that to table it, and then so that Mr. Honeycutt and the property owner can work with staff and come up with a minimum that would be required.
Because we certainly don't want to. We're not trying to knock you guys out of the game here.
The wetland lines on this property has been confirmed by St. John's River Water Management District. And the lines that were shown, the plans that were submitted to the county are on that first plan you look, are those lines. And so the city accepts what St. John's accepts. And so those are the actual wetland lines that are shown on there, and that's what we're using.
But that wasn't provided to the city?
Well, they have the plan that was used for rezoning.
But you guys didn't provide that with this to the city?
We didn't add it to this, no.
Okay.
But they have that plan, and then what started this is we submitted the pre-app, and we asked for the buffer not to be required, and they said, came back with the property adjacent to us to the south was zone residential, so it was required, and so hence we came around to the variance request. Yeah. So as far as the wetland lines go, those lines, the city's had them in their file, they've had them, we talked about it for over a year. It's not like that's not determined.
Staff had mentioned that I don't know if it was you or the developer that had requested this to be zoned to its current zoning with the 6,500 square feet, and you all are wanting to do this 7,800 square feet sections, which I understand. But considering that you all had requested it to be rezoned, is it reasonable to simply make the lots a bit smaller?
As Chuck explained a few minutes ago, the builders want a 40 by 70 building pad. And so the setbacks make the lot have to be the size that it is. The reason it was rezoned was for the lot width.
I see.
It just happens that it says the lot width can be 65 and that there's a minimum of 6,500. It don't say a lot depth. That's just math.
Yeah.
That you figure that out. The balance of the project is PUD, and we were able to change the rear setbacks if we needed things like that, but you can't do that in this zoning.
Thank you, sir. I can't make a motion.
Why can't you make a motion?
I'm the chairman.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I forgot.
I'll make a motion. Unless you want to make a motion.
I'll make a motion, and we'll,
Go ahead. I know your light was on. Fine, go ahead.
like to approve a variance of number 8-2017 for a variance to allow a 10-foot landscape yard in lieu of the required 20-foot to section 30-332 along the south line of the property.
We've had a motion. Is there a second? Not hearing a second. Do you have a different motion?
I make a motion to deny variance 8-2017, citing that there are not sufficient evidence for special circumstances of the property and not the minimum required.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, now we have a second. Is there further discussion of anyone to this motion?
The discussion is, again, I'm saying if we can table this till next time so that it's worked out and then brought back in, that would be my suggestion.
I would concur with tabling it.
I would. Make another
It's up to you.
discussion with the city.
Right now, there's a motion on the table to deny this item. Either you can withdraw your motion, or we can vote on this motion and move on to a motion to table it, but this item needs to be entertained.
Then, based on discussion after the seconding of the motion, I will withdraw my motion.
Does a second approve the withdrawal?
Yes.
Okay. So now there, well, a request or whatever for
A motion to table it?
motion to table.
We can make that motion without the...
I'd recommend that you discuss with the applicant what you're looking for and if they're willing to provide that.
Well, we need to have the minimum that would be acceptable.
They've given us a number of 10.
Well, the number of 10 was not based on something that they have done it, you know. I mean, it's not based on anything like a workable plan. So if we make the motion to table it, you're okay with that?
What are you asking the applicant to submit or do between now and your next hearing?
I would like the applicant to provide the wetland information, or at least have a conversation with the city about whatever is on record about the wetlands as it relates to this property.
Is the applicant willing to do that?
First of all, thanks for the offer. It's better than zero. I want to make sure I understand what I would be asked to have Honeycutt Associates do for us. If we have our current plan right now where you can see that there's a zero buffer and we have our lot count and the right sizes that we're looking for, are you asking us to reevaluate with the wetlands information and see if we can accommodate up to 10 feet? It might be 11 feet. I don't know what the answer is.
We are
but
asking
what's the most that we can, or the least amount we can ask for as a waiver?
Yes, completely ignoring the wooded area on the other side of your property. Ignoring all that. We understand
Having
why
a
it's
buffer on our
convenient.
property, what's the
Yes.
smallest buffer we could use, and that'll be our new request. Rather than 0 versus 20, it would be something greater than 0 and less than 20.
Yes,
And
so
we
basically.
need to evaluate that.
Yes, the minimum variant, the minimum needed, and because you guys are alleging the wetlands, the impact to the wetlands, I think that conversation with the city needs to happen.
When would we come back?
This is, I'm sorry, but this is not the only thing about the wetland. It's what's going to happen is, from the civil engineering point of view, that, shifting the lots to the north and see what the impact is and see if it could be accommodated. You probably don't need a variance. My thinking is, if you go the extra step, maybe, probably you are in the preliminary stages still, because you put the plan together, you have some cross sections done, see how it's going to work for the site, and it might come back that you don't need a variance, or you need a variance for 5 feet. And so it's a combination of shifting the lots to the north a little bit, and coming back saying, hey, we looked at this, and you need to work it with the staff. It's not like coming to us, because we are here just a body, a Board of Adjustments and Appeals, and we have to rely on the staff. We can't do the work for the staff themselves. So they have to come back and say, yes, we went through the various scenarios, and this would be something that we feel comfortable with. Although sometimes they don't support it, but they feel comfortable in doing it. And that's what we'd like to see from staff. And if that doesn't happen, then we have to look at it a little bit closer. So the staff need to be satisfied just enough so that they feel comfortable supporting the variance. And we are not seeing it today. And that's why we would like you to do that.
I'd like the opportunity to come back and present another request that's something less than 20 feet. However, I don't want it to be dependent on the staff recommending support for it, because I've had a great relationship with the staff, by the way, and this is just part of the process. They've cited the code, and it's clear to them that they can't change the code. There needs to be a buffer when there's two residential properties adjacent to each other. So I hope that by coming back with a new plan and seeing that, yes, we don't need all 20 as a waiver, we could do something less than that. If they're still going to give the same answer that, well, but our code says you need 20 feet, then we're not going to get the support. Then we'll be back here having this discussion, but you'll have more information.
Absolutely.
To hopefully go with the second motion and change a motion too. From where your
And
original
CID is not
thoughts.
saying that we have to have the city approval to do it. That's
Okay.
why we exist.
Yes.
What the city is saying in their narrative is that we didn't have enough information to consider this, so we're not even addressing it. And that's our concern.
Okay.
So we're not relying on, if it was up to them, we wouldn't be here.
Right, true.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's clear. But yeah, hopefully we'll continue to have good dialogues. Thank you. Yes.
Just
Mr. Honeycutt has one thing to add.
So a question I would have that may this interest to Chuck. When we table it, can we table it to the next meeting, and will that be in December?
Our next meeting is scheduled for January 24th, and the advertisement has not been published. It is due, I think, by the 1st of January. So if your advertisement could fit by that time, I think that you could be scheduled for the January meeting. and so we could table it to that time.
So I want him to have that information.
Does January 24th work for you?
Well, I don't know.
It just pushes, what we're trying to do is, we've already submitted plans to the various agencies, including the city, for our engineering plans, and that's just another 2 months of, we would have to go back and make changes to the plan again. And timing is definitely an issue for us. We don't know how long this market's going to continue the way it is, so we don't want to be stuck again. But our alternatives are, I'm comfortable right now asking for the less than 20, but I think that we didn't get a second motion on that request, or that on your motion. So I'm in a tough situation here. I got 2 more months. I thought it'd be next month, 30 days, but now we're talking about 60 days. Can I have a few minutes with Mr. Honeycutt? Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Would there be a special session? I
That's
mean, you
just
can-
what I was going to suggest. I'm not
Let's,
averse to.
let's, at the request of the applicants, they've requested a recess, so let's take a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back at that time.
And
Is
I'll
5
just
minute-
remind you
is
all
5
not to
minutes-
talk about this item.
Yes. Is 5 minutes presentable or 10 minute? 5? Very well. So at this time, 5-minute break. All right, we'll call the meeting back into session from recess at this time. Do we have any consensus from applicant to enlighten us, please?
So Rodney Honeycutt, again, speaking to you. First of all, on the wetland studies and everything, we don't even submit that to the city. We submit it to the Water Management District, and they approve the lines, and then that's what we show on our plans. And we get our permit from the Water Management District, and they accept that. So anyway, just to clarify that as additional information. So then Rick Kern in my office is the engineer on this project. And so I couldn't remember the details of how many lots. But if we have the 20-foot buffer, then there's about 7 lots that are lost. If we can move it back to 10, there's maybe 1 lot, and maybe we could save it. And so also we talked to staff, and it looks like it'll be 60 days almost, maybe 40 or 60 before we can come back. And so when you put the two together, we think that a 10-foot variance is reasonable in this case, and so that's what we'd like to request.
So you'd like to request that tonight then, and not wait 60
In lieu
days?
of the 20-foot variance.
All right. Changing their request to 10 feet as opposed to 20. Instead of 0, yeah.
Yeah,
excuse me.
0.
Instead of 0, changing
Instead of
it
a 0 landscape buffer or a 20-foot variance, yeah, however you say it, yeah.
I thought that was already requested.
We had a motion, no, we had a motion, we did not have a second,
Right.
So it wasn't going to fly.
so it didn't fly.
In the
because we
Right,
didn't-
because that's what we were voting, because he's already agreed to or mentioned the 10-foot earlier.
Well, some of the reason to table it was because the information, the wetland information was not submitted. And I'm just saying, we won't gain anything by submitting it because we don't even normally submit it. The city accepts what St. John's does on the wetlands.
The city's analysis would be the same unless the engineering has been changed by the applicant.
So that would not be needed for
Well,
for
I-
a table.
Then does the city have, the staff any comments then?
I thought that the wetlands consideration was only one aspect of it, because I thought what we were asking was that study combined with the potential for moving the entrance to the road up just a little bit, and some combination of that. I thought that's what we were asking you to come back with, that the feasibility of moving that road, 10 feet or whatever.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, Rick had already looked at that. I couldn't remember the ramifications. That's leaving the road to the north the same as it is because we don't want to impact more up there. So we're leaving that. And so if you take an entire 20-foot buffer with the restrictions that the builders want on the lot size, then that means that we'll lose like 7 lots. And so
That's not.
otherwise, we wait almost 2 months to come back, and I haven't seen anything to think that it would be different.
Well, I would like to hear what staff has to say, but I do have a question. If you take a 10-foot buffer and you're not moving the roads,
We are moving the roads.
you are moving the roads?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're moving everything up north 10 feet.
I'd like to hear what staff has to say after this discussion.
Please.
Well, while the wetland study isn't necessarily a requirement of the site plan review, engineering review, plat review, if, in our opinion, an applicant is trying to justify a variance based on something like that, then at least we would have liked to have had that more information regarding that justification. Just while I have the mic, if the applicant has requested that it changed to 10 feet, staff's recommendation hasn't changed because we still do not feel that adjacent property should be used to meet the buffer requirement of someone else's property.
I guess I'm not viewing it that way. I'm viewing it that they'll move the road 10 feet to accommodate it from going to zero and meeting you halfway. Because the concern here is the wetlands, and I think that we should applaud them for that. I mean, you can look at the map and see that they put the road right along the wetlands.
Well, our recommendation still wouldn't change based on the fact that we don't have sufficient information to determine if the 10-foot is the minimum or isn't the minimum at this time.
So just to add that, we didn't mean to infer that we have a buffer on someone else's property. We can't. What we meant is that that wooded area is going to be there, and the purpose of the buffer is to keep the woods, and we don't see a reason. So what we asked for is a variance from the 20-foot buffer requirement to be zero, and so now we're restating that and say that instead of zero, a variance to 10 feet instead of 20. And the mention of all the woods to the south is the reason to justify that the zero buffer would work.
Okay, so we've kind of walked through this now, and everybody has a better feel for it.
Just one clarification. What I want to do is, if you use the 20 feet, then you're going to lose 6 lots, basically. 7 lots. And you see, we can't do a variance on. This is not a hardship per se. So we need some kind of a hardship in order to actually, do the variance, vote on a variance. We have to have some kind of a hardship, and you need to help us out. Give us that hardship so that we can do it.
And so, as I've always said, what we're trying to do is protect the wetlands and the native habitat. If you look at this site, that's what it's all about, and so that's why we're asking for this. And Chuck might have something to add.
Well, I mentioned it earlier, and I said a lot of things too, that this property was a larger piece. That strip, the 340-foot strip that includes the easement, that includes the 50 to 100 feet of wooded lands before our property, was all part of the same parcel. And KB Home did not purchase that strip to the very south of us because we didn't want the Florida Power easement, and we also want to have a distance away from the power easement. And that 170-foot easement is where the swing is. So that swing does not go into the 50 to 100-foot wooded area. That's why you can see on an aerial it's all clear. It's all cleared because winds will swing those lines. And I don't think they ever get close to 170 feet back and forth, but they do 170 feet to make sure that there's not a really strong wind, and they have studies that keep it from swinging. So hindsight's 20/20. Perhaps we should have required the Flagler to put some kind of an easement on that additional footage, but what I've been told was it's not necessary because you can't develop that property. And if someone could tell me how that property could be developed residential, and then who in their right mind would actually want to put one lot behind our homes after bringing a road all the way from Grissom Parkway through wetlands, then that would just be one lot. But I don't even see that's going to happen. So the hardship, I don't know if that defines hardship also, but the hardship is that we have already shown that we've made concessions on this overall project from when we had a development agreement, from when we had townhomes already approved on this particular site, from when we had 100% residential on the entire site. So we've had some hardship, yet we are where we are today, and asking for now only 10 feet versus a zero buffer would help us not have to use some of our mitigation credits to impact more wetlands, but also will accommodate the current site plan without having to lose 7 lots. I think you said we might only lose 1 lot. That's what Rick said on the phone too. So I'm not sure what the true definition of hardship is. But I want to just give that brief history one more time and talk about how your code is set up for when there's two residential properties that are adjacent to us. When one property cannot be developed, I don't see how it can be developed. When you look at your setback requirements, your lot size requirements, the minimum lot size could be a 65 by 100-foot lot. That has to be a lot that goes.
Yeah. This is mainly a futuristic thing, and what you are looking at, it's never going to be developed as a residential, but it might be developed as something else. You might have a ditch going through it, or a roadway going through it, or
And
something.
your buffering changes then, too.
Well,
It goes
it's
down
true.
to the 10.
But it's still, your property buffer should be 20. It's 20, it's in the zoning. That's what it is. It's part of your property. We can't be looking at somebody else's property for the buffer.
I mean,
If you would like some input on what a hardship is, I can give you some clarity here from my resources that I have here. The criteria has been interpreted to mean three things. The first is that a mere economic disadvantage due to the owner's preference as to what he would like to do with the property is not sufficient to constitute a hardship entitling the owner to a variance. If, however, the only allowable uses are economically impossible, then a variance would be allowed. The second is neither the purchase of property with zoning restrictions on it nor reliance that zoning will not change it will constitute a hardship. And third, if a purchaser buys land with a condition creating a hardship upon it, the owner is only entitled to such variance as his predecessor in title was entitled. If the owner participated in an affirmative act which created the hardship, such as by purchasing only a substandard piece of a larger lot, then the hardship should be ruled self-created. I have some more in here, but I think those are the three principles that you're supposed to follow when looking at hardship.
So you're telling us to vote no?
I'm trying to provide
Thank you.
insight
Thank
for
you.
your decision.
Okay, we've had some recommendations, we've had some thoughts. Is anyone willing to make a motion?
Just one more question to staff, and you mentioned that it's going to be the earliest that could be done is when? The next meeting?
When we looked at the calendar, we also had to take into account Planning and Zoning Commission, council meetings, other staff members' schedules. Obviously, the 24th is the next scheduled meeting. I believe the other meeting date would have been January 10th, which is a Wednesday. Another board meets in the council chamber, but we've also moved them downstairs before.
Does this have to be advertised?
It doesn't have to be advertised, but that's only, and the city attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, only if at this meeting it's tabled to a date certain.
If it's within 30 days, then it won't need to be advertised, but if it's beyond that time frame, as a conservative approach, we would recommend that it be advertised.
And I can say January 10th, I am out of town, and so we're back to 4 people again.
Well, remember, we are in November 29th. I mean, could it be done like in 15 days or 20 days? Because since we don't have anything except this item.
What could happen in a week? What could we accomplish?
Well, we have to give the applicant some time, to come up with a solution. If
Well, right, we
2
would,
2 weeks.
Doesn't the applicant have to want to table it?
Right,
It sounds
that's
like
what I
they're
was just-
changing their variance to do it right now.
Okay.
If it could be sooner, but I think we had that discussion, so we thought at first it could be the middle of December, but there were problems with that, and it turned out to be just a week or two before January 24.
right, yeah, there's scheduling conflicts, time for staff to write up an analysis, email it to all the members, other board meetings, and the holidays.
So does the applicant want January 10th? Or no? 4 people? Oh, Lori won't be here either?
We also delayed coming here last month because there wasn't a full board here as well. So that's,
was
we've
only
already
4 people
delayed
last time.
30 days and there are more delays. And when we spoke with Mr. Honeycutt's associate at the office, he confirmed that 10 feet, it's tight, but it's workable. So I don't know what more information that we would be able to analyze on our own. Because we have confidence that the 10 feet would work. We just asked for the 20 feet in our request.
Okay, so we've had a change in the request from 0 to 10. We've discussed it a good bit. Do I have a motion in any direction?
I think with the wetlands, I think they've come back. They've waited on us to defer. I think that, Titusville needs housing. We need housing bad. Nobody built, and there is nothing, and we have all these jobs coming in and nowhere to put them. They're going south or they're going north, and they're walking right through Titusville and saying, there is nothing here. And they're looking at our 1960 homes that have been upgraded and redone, and they're going, we want new. So we're not accommodating the people wanting to come here or the people that live here.
We are accommodating the code, though. I mean, that's what we're
Yes,
here
you
for.
are. But there, I mean,
That's why we
I don't,
exist.
I think that's outside the purview of what our considerations are. I take, I'm not disputing what you say, but I don't think that has a bearing on this decision. I would ask one thing in looking at this, though. I noticed that you have a trail, which we neglected to ask you earlier, that runs down the perimeter of this property. Is that part of your buffer?
Where do you see that?
I was looking on the gray. On the concept. You're showing a trail. So I'm just wondering if behind all those homes is a trail.
Well, that gray section is everything on the southern border except phase one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's except phase one. So I said we wouldn't ask it for any other property. It's just this one section.
okay,
That's a
gotcha.
problem.
Yep.
I don't see a trail, but okay.
so if you're not asking it for the rest of it, then you're going to meet code on the rest of the property. Okay.
Okay, it's my prerogative. We'll call for a motion, or we just go let it go, one or the other.
I make a motion to grant a variance of 10 feet for variance 8-2017. Section, 3-332. And allow a 10-foot buffer as opposed to the 20.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay. There is no second. So is there any other motions or any other? Is there a motion to deny?
I'll make a motion to deny variance 8-2017 on the basis that the hardship was self-created. There is not sufficient evidence for substantial or special circumstance on the land, and the minimum variance has not been met or requested.
Is there a second? All right. Again, this motion failed due to no second. So,
I'll second. And the reason is, the applicant has stated they don't want to come back. So we may as well, there's only two choices apparently here, and that's 10 foot or nothing. I mean, that is basically what the applicant is telling us. Unless I'm misinterpreting that, you please correct me if that's the case.
All right, we've had a motion, we've had a second. Is there any other discussion?
I would just say, as far as discussion goes, although insufficient land was purchased, and I didn't hear anything that tells me how much of the wetlands need to be filled in order to have a minimum variance. We hear 10 feet, but the engineer is not here to explain anything else in depth. Our staff hasn't had an opportunity to discuss that. So I wish it had been postponed for more information, but at this point, I would say there's insufficient information and now is the time to do it. So that's why I think it should be not denied.
Any more comments? May we have roll call, please?
Chairman Taylor,
No.
Vice Chairman Shahab,
Yes.
Member Hunley,
No.
Member Johnson,
Yes?
Alternate Member Smith Rodriguez.
Yes.
All right, it's my understanding we have to have a vote of 4 or a vote of 3 on the denial. I get confused on this sometimes.
An affirmative vote of 4 is required for any matter except for 3 shall be sufficient to pass on a motion to deny a request for a variance. So we have 3-2, and this motion has passed a denial.
Yes. All right. So this has been denied at this time. All right. Is there any other business or anything to bring up, or petitions from any public to speak, or reports? Staff?
No, sir. Just want to wish everybody a happy holiday. And we do have an item on the January 24th meeting. It is an appeal.
All right.
So far, we still can have other
You
applications.
know, we can talk to staff now about this, or what?
No, not publicly.
This could be reconsidered at your next meeting. It
No,
is
no.
still an item that could come before you, so I would not recommend talking about the variance that you just voted on, if that's what you mean.
Well, normally we ask staff for questions
In general, or about this property?
about this property. You know, when we.
We've closed, we've already voted those things.
Right. We're not talking about, you know, this is like microphone. Yeah. So if we have questions to staff or suggestions where the staff, when the applicant comes back, you know, let's say we discuss, you know, the lots on the north side of the road, make those, instead of being 120 feet, make them 100 feet, and that's all they need. They don't have to change anything. They just shift the road at 20 feet to the north, and then they have their buffer at the south side. So they're not losing any lots, except those lots would accommodate smaller houses.
Sid, I think, though, staff heard everything that we said, so, I mean, we're not supposed to talk about this at all because it can come back. So whatever staff has heard today, they can consider.
Yes.
And they can bring it back if one of us actually can, if one of us actually brings it to the board, let's say on the 24th. If they come back on the 24th, say they want one of the board members to bring it up.
The applicant can't come back to the city and submit another application. The board member who voted to
Affirmatively.
deny that motion can bring it back on their own initiative.
That's
Only
what I'm
at the
saying.
next
you know,
meeting.
what
But-
would be the process to?
We might want to get back with you on the process because I thought they had to appeal anything to the clerk or the court. Maybe we should get back with.
The applicant has an ability to go to circuit court, but that's outside of the realm of this group. This group does have abilities to reconsider their decisions if they have advice or if they have new information between now and your next meeting.
How do we get new information?
The applicant has to present it to staff.
So applicant presents it to staff, and staff emails us?
The applicant would have to come to the next meeting.
and under petition explain such information.
I see.
There's
It
an
would have to be
ability.
new information.
The city code allows this process.
So I guess my question would be then, how much time do we have to review new information? Is it only going to be told to us at that meeting?
If you receive new information at that meeting, you could decide to table something.
Ah, I see.
This is all hypothetical because we don't know if that will happen, and it could happen for any item. It's a learning experience for you to know what the rules are for any item that could come back before you at the next meeting.
The big problem I see is, if there is an insight, if there's what you can do to bring it back and make the property owner, amenable to do the project and not lose any lots. And why not coordinate that to staff, and then the staff can talk to when he comes back.
We will certainly, like any variance, follow up with the applicant afterwards,
You would.
regardless of an approval or denial.
So if my thinking is if we give you suggestions, to do it.
So I think, City Attorney, what Mr. Shahab is asking is if he can contact staff on work hours and make any suggestions about what he came up with. I think that's his question.
Because we ask the staff all the time, say, why are you denying this? And they explain it to us in a sense why they're denying
I think that staff can explain their interpretation and analysis of the plans that have been submitted to you all in order for you to understand them, as you may go to staff before a meeting. The same would apply after a meeting. You may discuss the plans that have been submitted, but it's not appropriate for you to redesign somebody else's project.
The city engineer used to do that all the time.
That's when they're working with the applicant in front of them. But it's different if you are the person deciding on a variance and saying this is how your project should be built. That's not appropriate.
Okay.
Well, I want to know how losing 7 lots in a development is not an economic hardship.
Economic hardship is not a basis for a hardship of the land development code.
Particularly if it's self-imposed. I mean, that's like the condominium guy saying, well, if you just let me build another 5 stories here on top of the 10, you're costing me all this money. Well, no, that's not the rules.
The wetlands aren't
So-
self-imposed.
No, but they're trying to do more on this piece of property, apparently, from what you hear.
Is this
than-
conversation appropriate after the applicants has left and the hearing's been?
It's not.
It is not. So, do we have any other questions of staff to say reports? Happy holidays?
Yes, I would
Anything?
just, based on something Mr. Shahab said, I would just like to assure the board that staff works diligently with applicants before you receive an application.
Correct.
So.
All right. Thank you. Anything from council?
No, sir. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday.
You too, thank you.
Any members? Anything to report?
Nope.
All right. In that case, this meeting will be adjourned. Thank you.